This is a video on how I make black and white internegatives from color transparencies. You know, in my slideshow lessons that I've done thus far, much of the black and white prints that I've shown were made from transparencies, and this is an example of a transparency. So a color transparency is what I worked from for many years, and I was left with a lot of color transparencies, mostly in about this size, 2 1/4 by 2 3/4. And so when I decided to go in and do black and whites again, I worked from these originals. Now, in order to do that, I had to figure out how to make a really good black and white negative from a transparency. And that's what this lesson is. No one's asked me how I do this. I was hoping to get more questions from the videos I posted just about a year ago. I started a year ago, my first video. But I decided to do this because this is a culmination of everything I've learned in terms of darkroom work. This is perhaps the most difficult thing to do, is to make a good negative from a transparency. I did this for many years in color, making color negatives from color transparencies, but this video is going to be on making black and white negs. But in order to do that, I had to come up with a way that would accommodate the different curve shape that you're working from. Because when you work from a transparency, you're not working from a linear world anymore. It's not like going out and shooting original black and white negs. You're faced with a transparency that has a curve in it already. And color internegative material made by Eastman Kodak accommodated this to a certain extent. They lifted the shadow detail as much as they could on an internegative film, and they gave it upkick on the top of the curve to bring back the snappy whites that you would lose if you use conventional color films to make color negs from color transparencies. So in order to do this, I couldn't turn to color internegative material because I'm making black and white prints, and there was never a black and white material designed to accommodate this. So given that as a starting point, I came up with a way to do it, and that's what this is about. And I think I'll start with some examples. So I'm going to move the camera over here. And okay, so here is a print I made from the color transparency, and it's a picture of Mount Everest coming behind the clouds here. And there are designs painted onto these rocks. Basically, those are prayers. This is called like a prayer mountain, where people would have a wish, and they'll put signs on these, paint these signs on the rocks, and well, that's what that is. So, and then I made this black and white print. So in order for the black and white print to work, I had to convert the colors into a specific tonal value that would separate from its adjacent colors and objects. A lot of times when you convert color to black and white, it just looks flat and it doesn't work. So it's the local contrast. Again, you'll notice here the increased contrast compared to the color. And without that kind of treatment, a black and white print would not work. So I'm going to back so you can see this side by side. And So I took the original color transparency, made a black and white neg, and you have to keep in mind now, everything that I've taught in the past lessons are used. So there's masking, there's film masking involved. In order to understand film masking, you have to understand how to design a negative that black and white paper will respond well to. So it would really help if you watched the other video prior to trying to understand this one. Now this is in Cambodia, shot by Annie, and it's a graveyard. These are gravestones, markers, and so this is the color print, and then I made a black and white print. And again, it looks different, but they both work. What's most interesting is that when I made this, I felt it was a real challenge because of all the detail inside here. I mean, it looks probably on the camera, you can't see, but I actually pulled it out with film masking. So this is how to make a fine black and white print from a color transparency, not just a black and white print. Quickly, I'll go through these. This is in China. I think this is where they did Avatar, where they filmed the movie Avatar. These mountains in China, they look like they're floating in the clouds. Color, black and white. Again by Annie and Shu. This is rice fields in China. And then black and white version of it. And the black and white isn't as stunning as the color print, but it still works. All the detail can be seen if you close in and look at this print closely. It's easier to see the separation of tones when it's in color, obviously. So black and white is a real challenge. That's why I said this is kind of like the culmination of everything I'm trying to teach and how to use film masking. And then here's an interesting one. This is shot in color, but it's printed muted because it's such a foggy day. It's a great shot. This is like probably my favorite image that Anne had made. And when I made a black and white, it looks almost identical because they're both almost black. The color is almost black and white. The real challenge here was making a negative that's clean, so there's no dust. Because if you have dust on your negative when you're making it, then it'll print black because the dust is blocking exposure. And if you have black specks in here, then it's a lot of retouching to get rid of. So I think I made this neg 3 times in order to get one that was clean enough. And then this here is the crater of a volcano, huge volcano in Hawaii. Bob Cameron was hovering above this. And from that transparency, I made a negative, and I made this black and white print. So you can see how dramatic the sky is here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that because if you were to shoot in black and white, if Bob had shot original black and white film, he used an orange or red filter, he would darken the blue in order to get separation between clouds. But to get this kind of separation, film masking did that. So you have more control, and especially when you incorporate filters in masking, you can still use filters. This one is Yarlung Zangbo River in Tibet. And just the blues against that brown mountain in the foreground to get it to separate. I increased the local contrast. And again, if you were simply to convert it to black and white, it wouldn't look like that. Matter of fact, it didn't look like that when she shot it. It looks more like this. But this is what you do as a black and white photographer. You interpret the scene in front of you, and depending on how you expose it, process it, you interpret color tones into black. This is Chicago. Bob wanted to use this as the cover of I Love Chicago, but his publisher didn't want to use it. I thought it was great. You can see the Sears Tower, Chicago sky, and then again, getting the clouds to separate from that blue sky. You use a filter when making the mask, or even making a negative. You can filter. Generally speaking, I don't like to use filters when I'm shooting original black and white film. It's too dramatic. It's a real give and take. When you darken the sky, you also darken the shadow, because a lot of shadows are blue. So if you darken a blue sky, you're going to lose shadow detail. So I don't like using filters when I shoot. But when you're using filters when you mask, it's much more gentle. It's not as dramatic. You can still get this good separation here, which you would suffer from if you had shot original black and white film with filter. So coming down to the end of this. This is skies over Hawaii after a storm. Kind of golden here. A lot of blues. This mountain here coming out of the fog. It's clearly visible in color here. A real challenge when you make a black and white. So this has more drama to it. But again, this contrast is greater here than here. And that takes specialized masking, but it'll make more sense at the end of this lesson, I think. And there's good separation between the mountain here and the water. Here's another one. This one, perhaps the color works better than the black and white. But it's also, this is the Transamerica Pyramid coming through the clouds. And there's a little bit of color here. Actually, it was a challenge to make this so neutral. Original Transparency doesn't have such good color as this. But that little bit of color, which is kind of like a warm, slightly warm brown, works better than the black and white. Although the black and white is nice too. That's an example of where the color really adds that. It helps to separate the subject. This one too, the colors, this is rather dramatic. Bob called this cocktail time, because I think he had a cocktail every day. But the fog rolling over the city with the Bay Bridge in the background, and there's a Transamerica Pyramid. And converting this to black and white, it's very nostalgic when it's in black and white. Actually, you can see 76 here. That gas station is gone now. So you can tell this picture, this original was shot in the 70s. And here's one of the, I should zoom in on this. This is the fog rolling in over Carmel, Big Sur, I think. And I don't know how well this is going to pick up that. The detail in that mountain, the foliage, I mean, it's just a pretty dark green against some, as the hills dip in, you can see dark areas there, and that was a real challenge. This one, actually I like this one a lot. This is printed, and I subsequently printed this again. I made a bigger one because I like this image a lot. The clouds rolling in, the sky, the feeling is much stronger in the black and white print. So this is one where I really like the black and white quite a bit better. I actually have the big one on the wall here. I made it 20 by 24. And then this one here, this is back to Annie's picture. It's a shot of a rice. These are rice stacks drying in the sun. These two buildings were built by a Chinese gentleman who went to California. He was one of the few people that made a lot of money. And he came back to China, he had that built. So it's, the building obviously has American influences, and how they didn't build buildings like that in China at that time. And two sisters inherited those buildings. And then the black and white, again, has a very different feeling. It's almost haunted. It feels like the building's haunted or something. So that's that. And then this here is the fog rolling over a city. And again, this works very well. I mean, there's quite a bit of detail here. And although it's dark, because it's in color, you accept the different shades, because the color helps to separate all the foreground from the mid to the back. And even though it's dark, it works very well. And when I made the black and white, I had to lighten this. I wouldn't have been able to make the print work if I had kept that area as dark. And so the mask was concentrated on separating these buildings from one another. So the mask, you have to get it to a certain point and stop. The next stage mask separates that where you stopped from what's next on that gray scale. So that's okay. So those are the examples. Now, I think Yeah, now I'm gonna have to get the camera back over there. Okay, so I thought I would show you a couple of originals. This is the original, you can see, of that fog rolling the city. So in here it is pretty dark, but that's typical of transparency material. If you overexpose transparency, it goes light and there's no detail. So it's more common to underexpose rather than overexpose. And here's the original of the fog. Again, it's the detail is there, but and another thing is these are Ektachrome. Bob shot mostly Ektachrome or Fujichrome, and the most contrasty or the deepest black that you were able to get was from Kodachrome. But Kodachrome was only available in 35mm for many years. And for a short while, 120 was available, but Bob thankfully didn't shoot that many Kodachrome. I do have a Kodachrome example later to show you. But I'm going to back up this so you can see. Now, when I was younger, I developed a software package with my brothers, and it was how to make internegatives from color transparency. This I shot on Ektachrome, and I made a grayscale from black to white. Actually, this is white, so I put a light bulb behind a black cardboard, because highlights are usually on the rims of, glasses, or you can't really measure highlights. So to simulate a highlight, I blew it out so that I had white to black. And I created as many steps as I could on Ektachrome material. We did this over, I guess about a period of 10 years, we sold the software. And so eventually we made, see, this one here is a Kodachrome. So this is on Kodachrome film. And because Kodachrome was only available in 35mm, I had to shoot 3 successive exposures. So this is 1 35mm, 3 35mm was able to shoot the grayscale. And then I shot the Macbeth color checker above. This is a single exposure. And I put it all together. I don't know if you can see this, but I stripped it together behind clear film. And again, I cut a hole in this to create a true highlight. This is very black compared to that. Kodachrome's measured on a densitometer would reach almost 4.0, 3.8, whereas Ektachrome about 3.0. So Kodachrome is really lasts a long time as a color material. My mother purchased Kodachrome prints back in the 30s that lasted until she passed away. The color still looks pretty good. She passed away in 2005. That's a long time for a color print. And you can see the grayscale is not as good. This is one of the problems. Whenever people try to make a color print from a Kodachrome, they dealt with this crossover color. Well, inherently, Kodachrome, when you measure this on the densitometer, even though it may look gray to your eye, it's not gray to the densitometer. And yet you're asked to print it gray, and so you're contending with this mismatch of curves. It's not really crossovers; it's more a mismatch of curves. And then this is a Fujichrome. So when you make color negatives, we were able to recommend a specific balance for Fujichrome versus Exochrome or Kodachrome, all the while trying to maintain a good grayscale. Again, this is not as good as Exochrome. Kodak made the best material. They made the best color material that was able to hold a grayscale up and down from black to white. And you know this by measuring it on a densitometer. This is the Agfachrome. So Kodachrome, Exochrome, Agfachrome, and Fujichrome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Exochrome grayscale, which is a color grayscale, and make a black and white negative now. Okay, so I'm going to move the camera back. Let's see what I'm doing. Okay, so this is what I did before, and this is what I'm going to use now to explain how to make a black and white negative. This is a densitometer. I'm just going to zero it right now. And I was on YouTube for on and off for a year now, looking at the photography lessons and what's offered out there, and there are some videos that explain how to make a black and white print from a color transparency, but everything I've come across, they talk about making a paper negative. So basically you take the transparency and you project it onto paper, and obviously you get a negative. You dry that print, you contact it back onto another sheet of black and white paper, and then you get a positive. And it works. The problem, of course, is that you're printing through paper. So it's not sharp, it's not very sharp. You've got the paper fibers blocking the light, and this is actually very similar to how one of the first photographs were made. It's very similar to the calotype, which was invented by William Henry Fox Talbot. He loaded his camera with paper that was sensitized. So when he photographed the scene in front of him, he got a paper negative. He would contact print it onto another sheet of paper and get a positive. It wasn't nearly as popular as the daguerreotype, because the daguerreotype was photographed onto a metal plate, and the catching of the light, and it was so sharp, so much more sharp than the calotype, that the calotype never really took off, even though it predated the daguerreotype. So one of the problems was trying to print through paper. So what's on YouTube is precisely that, making a paper negative and then contact printing it again to make a positive. When the calotype process started to use glass instead of paper, the wet plate process, it put the daguerreotype into disfavor, and that's what took off. Finally became the norm. And then when Eastman Kodak developed film, clear film as a support, then it became more convenient than carrying glass around. And also was a dry, the glass process was a wet plate process. When it went to film, and by the 1930s, everyone was shooting with film instead of glass. And the good thing about film and glass is it's clear. And so that's what I'm going to be talking. I'm going to show you how to make a negative on film, not paper. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to stop here.